I never thought a pastel-colored baby shower decorated with balloons and paper flowers would become the battlefield where every hidden scar in my family was ripped open for the world to see. But then again, I also never thought I'd live to watch my own mother hand over the future I had built for myself, the inheritance my father wanted me to have, to my younger sister, like it was a prize at a raffle. My name is Elise. I'm 37 years old, a woman who learned to keep her chin high even when her chest was caving in. For years, I told myself that time would soften my mother's sharp edges, that eventually she would see me as more than the daughter who always stood in the wrong light. That day proved me wrong in a way so brutal, it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I grew up as the eldest of two girls in a small town in Colorado. Our house was nothing fancy, just a worn-down craftsman with squeaky floors and a stubborn front door that never closed properly. But it was filled with the quiet strength of my father. He was the anchor, the man who came home smelling of sawdust and oil, and who had a way of making me feel like my existence wasn't some cosmic mistake. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to treat me like a burden from the very beginning. Maybe it was because I looked like him. Same dark eyes, same strong jaw, same quiet way of holding things in until they nearly tore me apart. Whatever the reason, her love always landed softer on my sister Lily, who was born 3 years after me, and who, from the first moment, seemed to embody everything my mother wanted. Lily was sunshine. She had the easy laugh, the long golden hair, the way of attracting attention without even asking for it. Where I was cautious, she was bold. Where I was reserved, she was charming. And where I was overlooked, she was celebrated. Growing up, I learned quickly that no matter how hard I tried, no matter the grades, the trophies, the late nights studying or helping in Dad's workshop, it was Lily who got the applause. She was the one whose school pictures went up on the mantle. She was the one Mom bragged about to the neighbors. I'd bring home straight A's, and Mom would barely glance, but if Lily painted a crooked sunflower in art class, it was treated like a masterpiece. I told myself it didn't matter that I had Dad, and that his quiet pride was enough. And for a long time, it was. He was the one who stayed up with me when I cried over my first heartbreak, who taught me how to change the oil in my car, who whispered, "You're stronger than you think, Elise," whenever the world felt like it was crushing me. He was my compass. When he died suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago, I felt like the ground beneath me had cracked open and swallowed me whole. That loss nearly destroyed me. It also revealed truths I wasn't ready to see. In the weeks after his funeral, when the will was read, I found out that he had left me something, not everything, but enough to feel like he was still protecting me, even from beyond the grave. A modest inheritance savings he had scraped together, part of his life insurance, and the deed to a small cabin in the mountains where he used to take me fishing. For Elise, the lawyer read, because she will build something from this. My mother's face had tightened like she'd just swallowed poison, while Lily, sitting next to her in her black dress, had widened her eyes in surprise. I felt guilt at first, then shame, but then pride. Dad believed in me. He saw me. It was a lifeline I clutched in the lonely nights when grief felt unbearable. For a while, I kept that inheritance quiet. I used a little of it to pay off lingering student loans, and I saved the rest, planning carefully. I dreamed of opening a small bookstore cafe, the kind of cozy place Dad and I always talked about when we walked through town. It wasn't just money, it was possibility. It was proof that I wasn't invisible. And then came Lily's baby shower. She was glowing, of course, in a pale pink dress that floated around her like rose petals. The living room of Mom's house was packed with women, neighbors, relatives, friends, all sipping mimosas and cooing over the pile of gifts wrapped in pastel paper and ribbon. I tried to smile, tried to be the supportive older sister, even though every time someone said, "You're going to be such a great mom, Lily," a quiet ache grew in my chest. I had always wanted children, but after a series of miscarriages in my early 30s and the slow collapse of my marriage, I'd had to accept that motherhood might not be in my cards. Watching Lily cradle her swollen belly like a trophy of everything I had lost felt like swallowing glass. Still, I clapped when she opened the diaper cakes, the handmade blankets, the strollers. I cheered when Mom fussed over her brushing Lily's hair behind her ear, glowing like she had when Lily was a child. And then came the gift. It wasn't wrapped in the usual cheerful paper. It was in a sleek, dark box that Mom carried with both hands like it was something sacred. "This one is from me," she announced, her voice trembling with pride. Everyone leaned in. Lily's eyes lit up as she untied the ribbon and opened the lid. At first I thought it might be jewelry or maybe something sentimental like a photo album. But then I saw the papers, legal documents. My stomach dropped. Lily gasped, "Mom, is this?" And then my world tilted as my mother smiled and said, "Yes, the cabin. It's yours now, for you and the baby." I couldn't breathe. My chest burned as if all the air had been ripped from the room. I knew those papers. They were mine. The deed. The inheritance Dad had left to me. My name had been on them. My future had been bound up in them. And now, here in front of dozens of witnesses, my mother had handed them to Lily like a gift bag trinket. My hands trembled as I clutched the armrest of my chair. I wanted to scream, to snatch the box away, to demand how she had done it. Instead, I froze because every pair of eyes was on Lily, and Mom was basking in the applause as if she had just pulled off some miracle. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears. All I could feel was the hot sting of betrayal crawling up my throat. Dad's last gift to me ripped away. I should have walked out. I should have left right then. But instead, something in me hardened. Years of being overlooked, years of swallowing bitterness, years of being the shadow to Lily's spotlight, all of it condensed into a single burning thread of rage. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let them humiliate me again. Not here. Not now. The moment came 10 minutes later. Someone handed me a box wrapped in plain brown paper. From Elise, Lily read aloud, her voice tinged with a kind of polite anticipation, as if expecting something quaint, something small. She tore the paper away and opened the lid. For a second, silence filled the room. Then a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Inside was not a toy or a blanket or even a sentimental trinket. It was a folder. Documents. Letters. Proof. Proof of everything my mother had done to twist Dad's will. Proof that she had forged signatures, manipulated accounts, drained savings. Proof that she had stolen from me. I had spent weeks quietly gathering it, not because I wanted revenge at the time, but because something deep down told me I needed to protect myself. I never thought I'd reveal it. Not like this. But when Lily's face went pale, and Mom's smile faltered when the whispers began circling the room like vultures, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. I didn't say a word. I just watched as Lily flipped through the pages, her hands shaking, her eyes widening. "What is this?" she whispered, but the whole room heard her. Mom lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder, but it was too late. Cousins, neighbors, friends, they all saw. The silence turned heavy-charged, and for once, I wasn't the one being pitied. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the one holding the truth, the one forcing my mother into the spotlight she had always reserved for Lily. Except this time, it wasn't applause she was getting. It was horror. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment my family's carefully painted mask shattered, and everyone saw the cracks that had been there all along. And as much as it hurt, as much as it broke something inside me, it also set me free. Because once secrets are dragged into the light, they can never be hidden again. I don't think I will ever forget the look on my mother's face in that moment. Her lips pressed into a trembling line, her nostrils flared, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not anger, not superiority, not that cold dismissiveness she wore like perfume. No, it was fear. She knew I had cornered her, that the truth she'd worked so hard to bury was now spread open on Lily's lap for the world to see. And yet she still tried to claw her way back into control. "Elise," she hissed through her teeth, her voice shaking but coated with false authority. "This is a misunderstanding. Old documents. Lies." She reached again for the folder, but Lily pulled it closer, hugging it against her chest. "Mom," Lily whispered, her voice fragile as porcelain, this has Dad's handwriting, his signature. But here it's forged. I know his signature. What is this?" The room was deathly quiet. The sound of the ceiling fan overhead was suddenly louder than anything else, spinning like a witness that refused to look away. My cousins avoided my gaze. My aunt shifted in her chair, her lips pressed so tightly they turned white. And me, I sat there, my palms flat on my knees, my voice trembling, as I finally allowed myself to speak. "It's proof," I said softly, but every syllable cut through the silence like glass. "Proof that she stole from me. Proof that she went against Dad's will. Proof that everything he left for me was taken and handed to Lily like some party favor." My throat tightened. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I think I'd already shed them years ago in the lonely nights after Dad died, when I clutched the deed in my hands like it was the only evidence that I mattered to someone. My mother's jaw clenched, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for an exit. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You've always been dramatic, Elise. Always the victim. Your father wanted the cabin to go to the family, not to you alone. You twisted it. You made it about yourself like you always do." I laughed, then a sharp broken sound that I didn't even recognize as mine. "I twisted it." My voice rose trembling with a rage I had kept buried for decades. "You spent my entire life twisting me into something small. You spent my childhood praising Lily while you ignored me. You called me selfish when all I wanted was your approval. And when Dad finally gave me something that was mine, you ripped it away. You don't get to call me selfish. Not anymore." The crowd of women shifted uneasily, their hands tightening around champagne glasses, their eyes darting between us like spectators at a car crash. Lily looked stricken, her hands trembling as she clutched the folder. For once, she wasn't the adored child, the center of applause. She was caught in the crossfire, her illusion of our perfect family crumbling in her hands. "Mom, tell me this isn't true." She pleaded, her voice so small it nearly broke me. But my mother said nothing, and in that silence, Lily got her answer. The baby shower ended in chaos. People left in hushed clusters, whispering in the driveway, casting furtive glances at me, as if I were both villain and savior. Lily locked herself in her bedroom upstairs, sobbing into the phone. And my mother stormed into the kitchen, slamming drawers, slamming cabinets, slamming anything she could touch, as if noise could drown out the truth. I stood in the hallway numb, watching the family I had spent my life trying to hold together, split apart like rotten wood. That night, I went home to my small apartment. I sat on the couch, still in my dress, staring at the empty walls. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. I had exposed her. I had finally forced her to face what she'd done. But instead, I felt hollow. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just carves new ones. And while my mother's reputation crumbled, I still carried the same ache inside me. The days that followed were a blur. My phone buzzed constantly. Some relatives called to tell me I had done the right thing. Others scolded me for humiliating my mother in front of everyone. Lily sent texts that alternated between fury and sorrow. Why didn't you come to me first? Why would you do this at my shower? Why ruin everything I wanted to explain that it wasn't about ruining anything? It was about survival. It was about finally stepping out of the shadows she had been placed in since childhood. But words felt useless. Nothing I said could undo the scene I had created. Then came the knock at my door. It was a Tuesday evening when I opened it to find Lily standing there, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She was holding the folder against her chest like a shield. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I hesitated, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to slam the door. Part of me wanted to pull her into my arms. Instead, I stepped aside. She walked in, setting the folder on the table, and for a moment, we just stood there in silence. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't know." Her voice cracked. "I swear, Elise, I didn't know she took it from you. I thought Mom was just generous. I thought she wanted me to have something special for the baby. I never imagined she could." She broke off, tears sliding down her cheeks. I believed her. As much as I had resented Lily, as much as I had envied her, I knew she hadn't orchestrated this. She had always been Mom's favorite, but she hadn't asked to be. She had just existed in the sunlight that was offered to her. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't the enemy. She was another pawn in Mom's twisted game. But still, my voice came out sharp. "You never asked why she gave you something that wasn't hers to give. You never thought maybe it was too much." She winced, hugging herself. I didn't question her. I never questioned her. "She's my mom." Her voice faltered softer now. "She's our mom." I sank into a chair, my hands trembling. "No," I whispered. "She's not our mom. She was your mom. To me, she was just a woman who gave me life, but never love." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lily looked at me, her face crumpling, and for a moment I thought she would walk out. But instead, she sat down across from me. "I want to make this right," she said quietly. "I'll give it back. The cabin. Everything. I don't want it if it means losing you." My chest tightened. For so long, I had dreamed of hearing those words, not about the cabin, but about being chosen, being wanted. But instead of relief, all I felt was exhaustion. "It's not that simple," I murmured. "Even if you hand it back, the damage is done." She took Dad's last gift to me. She twisted it into another way to prove I didn't matter. That doesn't just go away. Lily's tears fell silently, one after another, and I felt my anger unravel, just slightly replaced with something else. Grief. Grief for the sisterhood we could have had. Grief for the childhood I never got. Grief for the father who had tried to protect me, and for the mother who had never loved me the way I needed. We talked for hours that night. Sometimes we yelled, sometimes we cried, sometimes we just sat in silence. And in that fragile space, I realized that exposing Mom had done more than just ruin her facade. It had forced Lily and me to face each other for the first time, not as rivals, not as mother's favorite and mother's scapegoat, but as two broken women trying to piece together something resembling family. In the weeks that followed, the fallout grew. Mom avoided me, refusing to answer calls or texts. She spread stories about me to the relatives, painting me as unstable, ungrateful, vindictive. Some believed her, others didn't. But I stopped caring. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate for her approval. For the first time, I saw her clearly not as a mother. I failed to please, but as a woman so consumed by control and image that she sacrificed love itself. One afternoon, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I realized something that both broke me and set me free. I could never make her love me. No matter what I did, no matter how many truths I exposed, no matter how many battles I won, she would never give me the mother I needed, and that had to be okay. But the story wasn't over, because one final twist was waiting, one that would shake me to my core, one that would prove that the inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about a secret my father had carried to his grave, a secret my mother had tried to bury with him, and I was about to uncover it. The secret found me in the most unexpected way. It was a rainy Thursday evening when the phone rang. I almost didn't pick it up. I had grown used to screening calls after the baby shower debacle, tired of judgment and gossip disguised as concern. But something told me to answer. It was Mr. Callahan, my father's old lawyer. His voice was heavy, almost reluctant. "Elise," he said, "I've been meaning to reach out since the day of your father's will reading. But your mother insisted certain documents weren't necessary to show at the time. I regret listening. After what happened, I revisited the file. I found something that belongs to you." My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might drown him out. "What is it?" I whispered. "Come by tomorrow. I'd rather show you in person." That night, I barely slept. My mind spun with possibilities, another deed, maybe more savings. But deep down, a different fear stirred. If my mother had hidden something, it wasn't likely to be a gift. It would be a wound. When I walked into his office the next morning, the smell of old paper and lemon polish hit me, and memories of Dad sitting across from Mr. Callahan surfaced. He used to bring me along sometimes when he signed documents, reminding me that knowledge was power. I hadn't realized until that moment how much those lessons mattered. Mr. Callahan slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "Your father gave this to me 6 months before he passed. He asked me to deliver it to you if certain disputes ever arose. I believe now is that time." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in my father's neat, blocky handwriting. My eyes blurred before I even began, tears rushing to the surface. "My Elise," it began. "If you're reading this, it means your mother has done what I feared she might. I know you felt like a stranger in your own family, and I regret not protecting you better. But there is a truth you deserve to know. The cabin, the savings, the inheritance, it was never just about money. It was about correcting a wrong that you didn't even know existed." I froze, the words burning into me. Correcting a wrong. Elise, you were not meant to be your mother's responsibility alone. She resented you because of choices I made before we married. Choices she never forgave me for. You were born of love, yes, but also of a time when I was torn between two lives. Your mother knew this when she agreed to stay, but she never stopped blaming you for what was mine to carry. The inheritance was my way of telling you that you are not less, never less. You are my daughter, my pride, my strength. Do not let her convince you otherwise." I dropped the letter, my chest tightening, as though the air had been ripped from the room. My father was confessing what my mother had thrown at me in subtle jabs my whole life, that I wasn't fully hers, that I was a reminder of some betrayal she could never move past. But here in his own words was the truth. I had been caught in a war between them long before I could understand it. Mr. Callahan cleared his throat gently. "There's more," he said, sliding another file toward me. Inside were documents, financial records, letters, and finally, an amended will. One that clearly stated the inheritance was meant solely for me, not the family at large. He had known my mother would try to twist it. He had tried to shield me even in death. I walked out of that office trembling. Rain splattered against my coat as I clutched the envelope, the truth pressing against me like a weight and a liberation all at once. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining her disdain. It had roots. It had history. And for the first time, I realized something that changed everything. Her cruelty was never about me. It was about Dad. It was about choices he made, scars she carried, and the fact that I was the living proof of it all. When I got home, I called Lily. My voice shook as I told her, "There's something you need to see." She came over that evening, her belly round beneath her sweater, her face still tender from our last conversation. When I handed her the letter, she read it slowly, her eyes widening. By the time she reached the end, she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Elise, all those years she hated me," I said, my voice breaking. "And I thought it was because of who I was. But it was because of who I came from." We sat in silence, the weight of it crushing us both. Lily reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "You didn't deserve that," she said firmly. "None of it. She should have loved you anyway. She should have loved you more." Her words cracked something open in me. For the first time in years, I cried openly, not the quiet tears I shed in secret, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from the little girl inside me who had begged for her mother's love and never received it. Lily held my hand and cried with me, and in that moment I realized we weren't enemies. We were both daughters caught in the wreckage of our parents' secrets, but the letter wasn't just a confession. It was also a spark, because now I had proof. Proof not only of the inheritance being rightfully mine, but of why my mother had fought so hard to bury it. And something in me knew I couldn't just let it sit in a drawer. 2 weeks later, I filed a case in probate court. The documents, the letter, the amended will, it was all there. My mother tried to fight it, of course. She hired lawyers, spun stories about my instability, about how I had misinterpreted my father's words. But the evidence was undeniable. Slowly, painfully, the truth came out in front of a judge. I remember the day of the hearing like it was branded into me. I sat in the courtroom, my palms sweating, while Mom sat across the aisle in her crisp suit, her hair pinned neatly, her face a mask of composure. But I saw the tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers clenched the armrest. Lily sat behind me, a silent pillar of support. When the judge read his decision, awarding me full rights to the inheritance, including the cabin, I felt a rush of vindication so sharp it was almost painful. For once, the system had sided with me. For once, I wasn't invisible. But then, I looked at my mother, and what I saw nearly unraveled me. She wasn't angry. She wasn't smug. She was broken. Her eyes were hollow. Her shoulders slumped, as if in losing control of this, she had lost the very thing that kept her upright. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. Almost. Because pity could not erase the years she spent making me feel unwanted. It could not erase the betrayal of that baby shower. It could not erase the scars of a childhood where love was rationed like crumbs and I was always starving. After court, Lily hugged me. "Dad would be proud," she whispered. And for the first time, I let myself believe it. Yet victory felt complicated. I had the cabin, the savings, the proof. But I also had the heavy truth of why my mother had despised me. And I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. Should I confront her, Should I cut her out completely? Should I let karma finish the work I had started? Those questions haunted me as I drove up to the cabin a month later. The mountain air was crisp, the pine trees swaying gently. Inside, dust covered the old furniture, but Dad's presence lingered. His fishing rod still leaned against the wall. His books lined the shelves. It felt like stepping into his embrace. I sank into the old armchair, clutching his letter, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. But even there, peace was fragile, because a knock on the cabin door was about to bring one more revelation. One final twist that would tear open everything I thought I knew about my family and force me to make the hardest choice of my life. The knock was steady, not tentative, and somehow I knew before I opened the door that it was a piece of the past I'd never been allowed to touch. The mountains were wrapped in thin mist, the porch slick with fresh rain, and a woman stood there with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, the kind of graceful posture you learn from years of teaching yourself not to tremble. She was in her late 50s, maybe 60, brown skin, warmed by the cold, dark hair streaked with silver, and gathered at the nape of her neck. Her eyes hit me like déjà vu familiar, in a way that made my bones recognize something before my mind could catch up. "Elise," she asked carefully, as if my name were fragile china. "I'm Anna." The name opened a door I didn't know I had inside me. I stepped back and let her in because every cell in my body leaned toward her, because even the air in the cabin seemed to hold its breath. She took in the room like a pilgrim entering a chapel, her gaze landing on Dad's old armchair, the shelves of battered paperbacks, the coffee ring on the side table that never came out, no matter how hard I scrubbed. When she smiled at that ring, I knew without being told that she had loved him once in another life. We sat at the small table by the front window, pine branches tapping the glass like an old friend trying to be brave. She put a faded envelope between us. "He asked me to wait," she said. "He wanted to tell you himself when you were ready, but then time stole the chance. And your mother made sure I believed I would only harm you by coming." Her mouth trembled. "I have thought of you every day, mi cielo. I have whispered your name into my coffee, into traffic, into laundry, into years." I looked at her hands, work-worn, the knuckles faintly scarred a small freckle near her thumb that I had on my own hand. It was ridiculous and enormous all at once, a freckle becoming a bridge. "Did he love you?" I asked, because it was the only question that mattered before the others could make sense. She nodded. "Yes, we were young and trying to be brave and making all the wrong promises. He was engaged already. He told me he would fix it. He meant to Elise. But families are complicated, and pride is a wolf that eats what it needs." She swallowed. "Your mother found us. She said if I didn't disappear, she'd make sure you grew up hating me, thinking I'd abandoned you for a man or for myself. She said she'd ruin him too. I didn't have power. I had a stomach full of fear and a life that kept shrinking. When she brought you to me once, just once, when you were days old, I held you for 7 minutes. She took your picture with a disposable camera, put the print in my hand, and said, 'This is all you get.' My ribs ached. I pictured my mother, sharp as winter, precise as a rule book, making bargains with grief and calling it motherhood. I thought of my father, stubborn and gentle, dragging shame behind him like a broken sail. And then I pictured a young woman holding a baby for 7 minutes and being told to swallow the rest of her life. Anna slid the envelope closer. Inside were letters, my father's handwriting looping and earnest. He had written to her from the cabin, from the workshop, from a motel on the outskirts of town, where he'd hidden on nights when fights at home broke the sound barrier. He wrote about me my first tooth, my laugh that sounded like a squeaky hinge, my stubborn refusal to nap, the way I lined up my toy trucks in a perfect row. He had written about loving us both wrong and loving us both as best he knew how. There was also a photograph, the edges furred from being taken out and put back too many times, a young man and a young woman sitting on the tailgate of a truck, shoulders touching the cabin behind them. In the woman's arms, a bundle with a tuft of dark hair and a furious, squinched-up face. On the back, in his handwriting, August 1988. Our beginning and my failure to be brave. I didn't cry. I felt like a bell rung so hard the sound stopped being sound and became a hum in the bones. I had asked my whole life why I felt like a visitor at my own table. The answer was holding my hand and not letting go, even when my palm started to sweat. We talked until the pale sky went dim. She told me about her small flower cart that became a shop the night she counted tips like prayers. The men she didn't marry, because their kindness scared her more than their indifference. I told her about school lunches eaten behind the gym, my father's shoulder a safe place to fall, the way my mother's compliments always arrived with a receipt. We spoke like people who had been underwater for decades and had finally surfaced sputtering but laughing at the shock of air. When she stood to leave, I surprised myself by saying, "Stay. Please. For a few days." I didn't know exactly what I wanted, only that the ache in my chest calmed when she moved through the cabin, tidying magazines and humming under her breath, when she ran her fingers over Dad's old fishing lure and set it on the shelf like an altar light. The second knock came on Sunday, and it was thunder. My mother stood on the porch, rigid as a commandment, eyes flicking past me to the shadow moving in the kitchen. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe the years had finally caught up with the energy it takes to carry a lie across a lifetime. "I am not here for theatrics," she said, and her voice was a little hoarse. "We will not perform for the trees." I wanted to laugh or scream or invite the pines to be the jury because they had watched us longer than anyone. Instead, I opened the door wider. "Then come tell the truth, Mother." The word felt like a jacket that didn't fit. "We both know it doesn't belong to just you anymore." She stepped inside and stopped when she saw Anna. There was a flash across her face, shock-fury calculation before she smoothed it away. "You," she said almost gently. "I told you to stay gone. And I told you I would if it meant Elise would be loved," Anna answered, voice steady. She wasn't. My mother gave a short, bitter smile. "Loved." She looked at me now, and I saw the thing she had never allowed in front of me, fear's twin, which is shame. "I fed you. I kept a roof over your head. I taught you to hold your fork right and not embarrass the family. I stayed when your father broke his word. That is love." "No," I said, my hands shaking despite how hard I pressed them into the table. "That is survival. You gave me shelter and rules. You didn't give me gentleness. You gave me a checklist. And you," she snapped, turning on Anna, "you would have raised her in what some rented room over a laundromat with poor people parading through. You would have taught her to be small. I taught her to be hard. Hard keeps you alive." "Hard kept me lonely," I said quietly. "Hard made me a soldier in a war I didn't start." She flinched just slightly, as if I'd grazed skin that had always been tender. Her gaze landed on the photograph on the table, the 3 figures in a younger summer. I watched her study the back, my father's handwriting. When she put it down, the lines around her mouth were deeper. "I did what I had to do," she said. "Your father would have thrown his life away on fantasy. I chose the life that could feed you, and then I chose to make you strong because I knew you would be blamed for his weakness if I didn't. I took his money, and I gave the cabin to Lily because babies need a place to be safe. That is not theft. That is redistribution." The words were precise as always, but her voice wavered on the last syllable. I felt something that scared me almost more than rage compassion. It rose like warm water, and I wanted to lower the bar against it. But there it was, scalding, unwanted, honest. Compassion for the 19-year-old version of her who learned power was the only way not to drown. Compassion for the woman who arranged the furniture of our lives so nothing could be knocked over, then became the person who knocked everything over herself. Anna sat very still, then spoke the sentence that pulled the pin. "You blackmailed me with my own poverty," she said. "You told me if I showed myself to Elise, you'd say I came for money, that I'd put a price on her name. You used my fear to salt your own wound." My mother's face went blank, and then it wasn't blank at all. It crumpled not dramatically, but like a building that had been waiting for its last beam to rot. She sat down on the edge of Dad's chair, like she needed to borrow his spine. "I was so angry," she said to the floor. "I was so angry, and anger is smart until it isn't." None of this stitched anything closed. None of it gave me back 4th grade or the times I called home from college and hung up because I could not bear the way she said hello like I was interrupting. None of it rewound the baby shower where she smiled as she cut me open in front of neighbors. But it was the first time she had put a name to it, anger, and admitted it used her as much as she used it. "What do you want, Elise?" she asked finally, like the question was heavier than the door she'd just lifted. "Name the punishment. Name the price. You've won in court. Tell me what is left." I looked at the two women who had shaped me without ever sitting at the same table, one who gave me blood and absence, one who gave me structure and ice. I thought about revenge and how it had tasted sharp and necessary, and then metallic. I thought about Lily's child, a life not yet trained into hardness. I thought about the cabin and the bookstore cafe I still wanted to build, and the kind of rooms I wished I had grown up in, rooms where love was not proof of worth, but the air you got to breathe. "I want 3 things," I said, and the steadiness of my voice surprised me. "First, you will apologize to me and to Anna. Not the kind of apology that is really a closing argument. A real one where you admit what you did and you don't ask for forgiveness as payment. Second, you will go to therapy and stay long enough for the therapist to learn your last name. Third, you will not ask me to pretend this didn't happen. If we have a relationship, it will be the truth, or it will be nothing." She opened her mouth and then shut it like the taste of honesty was not what she'd expected. "And the cabin," she asked, because control is an old habit. "The cabin is mine," I said. "Dad gave it to me to correct a wrong. I'm going to open the cafe like he wanted books and soup, and a wall where kids can draw without being scolded. I'll name it Pine in August, and there will be a corner named Lily's Nest where new parents can sit and breathe. If you ever come, you'll pay like everyone else." The smallest tug at her mouth might have been the ghost of a smile or the polite death of one. "Your father always loved ridiculous names," she said, and for a split second, the 3 of us were in a memory we didn't share, but somehow all knew. The apology she gave us that afternoon was a messy thing, stops and starts the old instincts fighting the new attempt. She said she stole from me and dressed it like justice, that she kept Anna away because pride convinced her it was protection, that she chose control over tenderness, and now she was tired. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't weep performatively. She said she was sorry and then was quiet, and that silence felt like the first honest room we had ever stood in together. We didn't hug. This wasn't a movie. This was a life. She left with a promise to call a therapist. Anna washed the mugs and insisted on sweeping the porch, and I stood in the doorway watching the brooms of light fall through the pine, feeling both orphaned and adopted at once. In the months that followed, We arranged something that looked like a new map. Lily gave birth to a son with hair as dark as midnight and a yawn that made everyone in the room laugh. I held him and felt terror and hope compete in my chest. When Lily placed him in the rocking chair corner of Pine and August on opening day, the whole town came to taste chili and leave with secondhand novels and smear their fingers with pie. People I didn't know told me they'd read about the court case in a line at the grocery store and quietly wished me well. The cafe smelled like butter and sermons, and when I chalked Lily's nest above the small shelf of board books and blankets, I felt my father's hand on my shoulder like a weather meant to last. My mother came in on Wednesdays at 9 and sat by the window and ordered weak coffee because she was tired of strong things. She brought a notebook. She wrote while she sipped, sometimes glancing up, as if surprised that the world was still here. On the 5th Wednesday, when I set her cup down, she put her hand over mine and held it longer than a transaction requires. "I am learning how to say your name like a blessing," she said. "Sometimes it comes out like a bruise. I'm working on it." There were days I wanted to ban her. There were days I wanted to lean across the table and put my face in her lap and wail for the girl I had been. Most days, I chose the work of ordinary peace, stocking napkins, sharpening pencils for the chalkboard, telling the barista to take a break, texting Lily dumb pictures of a pastry that collapsed like my patience. Revenge had cut the knot. Building kept my hands busy so I wouldn't tie it again. When Anna came in, she brought flowers that looked like laughter. She told the baby stories in Spanish and English, and sometimes I watched my mother watch her with a look I didn't have a word for yet. Maybe grief's cousin. Maybe humility finally. Sometimes they spoke at the far table. Sometimes they didn't. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was two veterans comparing scars. On the anniversary of the baby shower, I drove up to the cabin alone. I brought Dad's letter and a thermos and the photograph that had turned the world right side up. I sat on the porch steps and watched clouds practice being mountains. I thought about justice and how sometimes it wears a robe and sometimes an apron. I thought about karma, which people like to describe as a boomerang, but to me felt more like a mirror that follows you until you have the courage to look directly into it. I thought about the ways we inherit more than houses, the way we inherit silences, and how we learn to fill them with new music. If you're waiting for the kind of ending where the mother turns soft as cake and the daughter forgets the taste of iron, I won't hand you that lie. Some wounds close and leave topographies you have to learn to navigate. Some days, my mother's voice still scrapes. Some nights I wake and have to remember I don't need to audition for love. Some mornings I cut lemons and the light hits the blade just so, and I think I made a room. I made a room where I didn't have one. What I can tell you is this: I gave back the part of revenge that wanted to build a shrine to my pain. I kept the part that builds a boundary. I told the truth, and I stayed. I chose a life where the people who love me are not perfect, and the person I love most, the one I have to live with forever, is a woman who walks into her own cafe and doesn't look over her shoulder to see if anyone thinks she belongs. She already knows. If this story reached you and softened a corner you've been bracing against, stay a while with me. Like the video, if it helped you breathe, share it with someone who might need a light on their table, and subscribe so we can keep building a room where truth doesn't have to whisper. Tell me in the comments what you're ready to put down and what you're brave enough to pick up.